Morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. As you know, we were home yesterday. We are home again today. Finishing touches being put on some infrastructural stuff in the studio, so back to normal on Monday. The good news is, we had a glitch yesterday, and it was my fault. I think everything today from the home front is all set up and all ready to go. I will tell you that I am not in a great mood today, so sometimes we start the show, great mood today. Now, I'm excited about the content, just not in a very good mood. So, fair warning on that. Let's find out what's going on with you here right now, though. We'll get your comments here on our show before the show. Jeff Sentell stops by a little bit later on. Matt Rugavina says T-minus 1 week until the season starts. Off season is over. That's right. We got college football tomorrow. High school football for me tonight, but college football tomorrow. So it's here, and I'm excited about it. I really, really am. And it's kind of funny. So the off season is just forever long. Our sport has the longest off season. We talk about that all the time. It's amazing how quick the season goes by. What is it? 8 days from next Saturday, you're like, 15% of the way done with the regular season? It just goes, it's crazy how quick it all happens. But we'll ride the wave wherever it goes. Hunker Down 93 says he's ready for Saturdays between the hedges. Gets goosebumps just thinking about it. Yeah, I do too. And this is that time of year, Hunker Down, where I'll tell you, hearing something, a little feedback coming there. I don't think that's coming from me. This is that time of year where, believe it or not, I do try to exercise a little bit, although I'm slimmed down from where I was, a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago. So I'm doing okay on that front, but I do exercise, and, every now and then you sort of feel like you need that extra pick me up as you're kind of doing all that, trying to push through. And one of the things I'll do is I'll kind of go on YouTube and dial up the hype videos or the team running on the field, the pregame stuff, all the pageantry of the pregame. I do a lot of that and just really kind of using that to get fired up. And so I have been doing more of that lately. I'm ready I love the game on the field. I love to analyze what's happening between the white lines. But I also enjoy the stuff that takes place around all of that too. So we're looking forward to that. Brian Whitehead, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. UGA Marine, by the way, he had updated us yesterday. His son has a scrimmage coming up, or had a scrimmage coming up yesterday. Sounds like the scrimmage had some problems. Well, I'm sorry about that, Marine, but hopefully you guys get that all figured out. Bill Camacho checks in to say with the 9-game SEC schedule, it will work for the teams like Georgia and my Sooners since we play in neutral site games, so I'll take the 4-4-1 any day. Yeah, I do wonder about that, Bill, and we have talked about that before, that there are 4 teams, actually at least 4, right? Because Texas A&M and Arkansas have either wanted to kind of end their neutral site game or they're actually going to. But you kind of wonder if there's going to come a point when they do more SEC teams try to get the neutral site game, because it would be perfect if you could do 4-4-1. That would be perfect for everybody. It certainly benefit Georgia. And a lot of us think that when it comes to the SEC making a decision, if it's a decision that benefits Georgia, the SEC typically wouldn't make it. But since Texas is right there in the same boat, and thus far the SEC has bent over backwards to serve Texas's needs, maybe there is a chance that Georgia, Oklahoma, Texas, Florida, the teams that have that traditional yearly neutral site game, maybe they will get the benefit of 4-4-1, where you're never having to play 5 road games in a given year in the league. Perhaps we'll see that.
Arkansas and A&M return home and home this year.
Okay, so Arkansas and A&M are back to home and home. They had, for a long time, played in Jerry World. That was orchestrated because Jerry Jones, as the Arkansas, booster and Dallas Cowboys owner, had liked the idea of his team playing in his stadium. But, you get the impression that both fan bases would prefer not to have that. Garrison Tucker says, let's see y'all practice the cable scrolling, work that remote. Get a little early look at that tomorrow with the week 0. Not quite as many games. I'm not sure how much overlap there is or even how many of those games you're interested in watching, but you'll get some of that tomorrow. Matt Rugavina says, who do you think the 3 permanent rivals will be? Well, 2 of them are easy, Auburn and Florida. And frankly, I'm really happy to know that the 9-game, I am very much in favor of the 9-game schedule, very much in favor. And we'll talk about this later on. It's got nothing to do with the sort of dorky stuff that you hear from the media kind of carrying the Big Ten's water. It's got nothing to do with anything like that. It's really more about what's beneficial to the SEC. I like the 9-game schedule for this league. I like protecting the Georgia-Auburn rivalry, for instance. Now, not every team in the SEC has multiple rivalry games that need to be played. Some do. Georgia is one. So I'm glad that Georgia and Auburn is going to exist. I would say that the Georgia-Auburn rivalry means less to a certain generation of Georgia fans than it meant to even like, say, 10 to 15 years ago. It's one thing to go back to when I was a kid. It's another thing to go back to when my kids were born. And in the span of time that my son's 13, my daughter's 10, in the span of time that my kids have been around, it feels like this rivalry means less than it used to. So I've been a little bit worried that it just might go away. And Kirby Smart, who I sort of think of as a traditionalist, has not really been pushing for a lot of this lately. And you just kind of came to the belief that, hey, maybe this will go away. So the 9-game conference schedule gives you a chance to keep that, which I do like. And as far as the third opponent goes, we know it'll be Florida. We know it'll be Auburn. It seems like some of that is kind of altered over the course of time, and we'll talk more about that when the actual show gets going here too. I wonder if I can very quickly, before 10 a.m., squeeze in a hello for YouTube to see how they are doing today. I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I possibly can. Scott P. didn't here today, making fun of the Indiana schedule. It deserves to be made fun of. John Green pointing out that in future Georgia schedules, you've got Georgia slated to play like 11 Power 4 teams, 9 SEC, and multiple non-conference foes in each year. It's funny that the media never reports on that. I think that's really interesting, but it is true nonetheless. Jonathan Aaron checking in, as he always does, with some very funny stuff. Joey Smith encouraging folks to hit the like button. I really appreciate that, y'all. It means a lot to me. So many of you have shown continual support to us. I really, really appreciate that. You'll never know how much that means to me, especially when some of y'all are better at encouraging folks to do that than maybe I am for myself. I'm told the like button helps the algorithm. I'll trust that that's true. But either way, the fact that you do like the show, however you choose to express your like for the show, I really appreciate that. Okay, it is time to begin the show. Let's tell you everything we're going to do today. Let us fire up that animation. Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. One more show, at least for now, for us at home here today. Back in the studio as per usual and normal on Monday. We also have several big events coming up in the days to come. I'm going to kind of highlight a lot of those here in just a bit. I think that you'll be happy to hear about moments to kind of be out in public with us, if that's what you'd like to do. We'll tell you more about that here coming up in just a little bit. Also, a lot of content crammed in the show today. Big news from the SEC yesterday. The league is moving to a 9-game conference schedule. I think this is important for the SEC. I frankly don't care at all about the way in which many of the national media types carrying the water for a league like the Big Ten have kind of explained this as a needed step for playoff expansion. I can't stand any of that. I think all of that is stupid. I think the 9-game schedule, though, is good for the SEC. I will tell you why on the show here today. Jeff Sentell also stops by. One of the things that Jeff is going to help us with is something we're going to discuss off the top of the program today. It is time to get really focused on a few things for the upcoming season. After all, Georgia plays on Saturday, 1 week from tomorrow. One of the topics we'll kind of zero in and focus on today is the freshmen for Georgia who we believe have the best chance of making the biggest immediate impact, and we'll use some of what's also being said in the national media as a way of putting some parameters around that discussion. That comes up. Also, a player that I believe is really important for Georgia this year has gotten a pretty big compliment. I'll explain why I think that's a pretty big deal. And we gave you yesterday national media feeling good about one position group. How about the flip side of that today? A position group that we ourselves have expressed some lingering concerns about. Seems like others have noticed too. We'll talk about that over the course of the next few minutes as well. Jam-packed, loaded. Hope you enjoy it. We're glad you're here. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Today, by talking about Georgia's impact freshmen. And I want to put some parameters around this discussion. The easiest thing in the world to do, because I would like it, many of you would like it, we could just sit here and just start listing off names. You ever see the meme online where somebody says guys can just sort of sit there and list off names of ex-athletes, something along those lines? To an extent, that's true. We could just start randomly mentioning names from Georgia football's past, and those of us who really love Georgia football would probably enjoy that to a degree. And when it comes to our anticipation, which for most of us now is at a fever pitch for the Georgia season, which begins 1 week from tomorrow, we could also just talk over and over and over again about all the players for Georgia that we're excited about seeing. If we're diehard Georgia fans, we are excited about seeing them all. However, if we want to have a little more informed conversation, if we want to do something that more closely approximates what the actual season is going to look like for Georgia, then some of this has to come with some degree of critical analysis. We've got to put some parameters around all of this. So I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about the handful of Georgia freshmen who I do believe are most likely to make a big impact. And in doing so, you can't mention them all. And when I'm done with the few that I think are most deserving of this mention, we'll talk about others that came for me just close and maybe kind of why they weren't as more prominently mentioned as the others are. So let me begin with this. The number one name on my list, the freshman most likely to make the biggest immediate impact for Georgia this season, I do believe is Juan Gaston. Playing along the offensive line in some future year for Georgia, he may be an offensive tackle. This year, it's offensive guard. We think perhaps right guard. I don't believe he'll be the right guard that plays exclusively. I do believe that Georgia's going to still rotate. They've done that a lot in previous years. I think they'll do that here too. Some of that may even include Micah Morris at left guard. They may just sort of, flip-flop around a bit. They have done that in the past. But I have reason to suspect that Juan Gaston is now one of Georgia's 5 best offensive linemen. I trust people who know more than me. People who know more than me have told me that. I'm going to assume that they're right. I think that Juan Gaston is the number one freshman most likely to make an immediate impact for Georgia this year. I think he is essentially a starter-level player. We'll see if he starts game 1, but I think right now Gaston is essentially a starter-level player. It's also interesting to point out that Juan was also recently named by our friends at On3 a preseason freshman All-American. So, as we said yesterday, sometimes What gets picked up by the national media, reflecting the local conversation, is to a degree interesting. This perhaps the case when it comes to Juan Gaston. They write of Gaston, and my monitor's a little far away. I can't quite read what's on my monitor here right now, but you can see that if you're watching on video, Gaston praise earning freshman All-American consideration. Now I can see it a little bit. I'll read it. It says a mountain of an offensive lineman's the way they start all of this, and that's true. That's the first noticeable thing about Gaston is just how big he is, and that's the thing that a guard has to be. Kirby Smart has talked about that before. Yet there's also the requisite athleticism here, we think, for Gaston. He's slimmed down a bit from the gigantic size that he competed at maybe last year as a high school senior, even during the all-star camp circuit just before arriving at Georgia. We're led to believe he's slimmer now in a better way than he would have been then. But his immense, overwhelming size is obviously a big part of this. He also apparently uses that weight pretty well. That's one of the reasons why he has competed for playing time so well over the course of this fall camp and going back to spring practice too. We think that Gaston is likely to play. He is number one on my list. The next name on my list as a freshman All-American that's as recognized by On3, but also as a guy that we just think is likely to have an impact for Georgia this year, I'm going to say Elijah Griffin. And once again, I think it's important to have parameters around this discussion. First of all, in the write-up that On3 put out about Griffin, they mentioned him as one of the highest rated recruits they've evaluated in years, to give you an idea of the context for just what kind of promising prospect Griffin might actually be. But if you're a Georgia fan and you're trying to compare this to something you've seen in the past, just using the Kirby Smart era here for a moment, I think the high water mark, the best freshman defensive lineman in the Kirby Smart era, is probably Jordan Davis. I think that Davis, this goes back to 2018, which feels like a long time ago now. Going back to 2018, I think that Davis stepped in that year and gave Georgia a big lift with its rush defense they didn't have before he started playing. Davis started playing a bunch that year around the LSU game. The LSU game was a disaster for Georgia that season. But it was at that moment, I think Georgia figured out what it had in Jordan Davis. Much better player than the recruiting industry had pegged him as being. And the rest, of course, was history. Davis goes on to become one of the great players in the Kirby Smart era by the time he leaves in 2021. But he was already really good as a freshman. I don't think Elijah Griffin is a comp for Jordan Davis, though. I don't. One of the things that Davis used so well in 2018 was his gigantic size. Griffin's a big guy. Obviously, you couldn't be a five-star defensive lineman if you weren't, but not big in the way that Jordan Davis was, not the run-stopping force as a freshman that Davis was able to be. I would say, and these are lofty comparisons, I would say the better overall comparison for what Griffin might be is a little bit more like what Trayvon Walker was in 2019, and it's a pandemic year, so it's a little bit weird, but maybe what Jalen Carter was in 2020. We will see if Griffin grows into be the kind of player those guys were by the time they left Georgia, but I think the way that Griffin starts could be similar to Walker in 2019, where he was a guy that was on the field. He was in the rotation. Sometimes he flashed. He wasn't Georgia's best defensive lineman that year. And Carter in 2020, I'd say sort of the same way, where a guy that played, he flashed, you knew how good he could be. He was worthy of being in the rotation, but not Georgia's most important defensive lineman. I feel that way about Griffin right now. This is a player who I think you're going to want him on the field. I think you're going to be glad he's there. I think he could one day be not just a first-round pick, but maybe even better than that. Maybe following the footsteps of a Carter who became top 10 or a Trayvon Walker who became 1-1. Maybe Griffin could be that one day. For now, though, he's a part of the rotation. Not easy to play at Georgia as a freshman. We believe Elijah Griffin will. So those are my top two. They have both received preseason All-American status from On3, which leads you to believe the national media has taken notice of both Gaston and Griffin as well. We think that matters. There are two other names that I want to put on this list of impact freshmen for Georgia this year that I'm pretty sure are going to be playing a pretty good bit. The next easiest name for me is Bo Walker. Bo Walker, I believe, is going to be in the rotation at running back. I don't think he'll be Georgia's leading rusher. My guess is that's Nate Frazier. I don't think that Walker will get significantly more carries than the other running backs, although he might. I don't really quite know where, in other words, Walker is in the pecking order, but I do believe he's a part of it. Is Josh McCray ready to make an impact for Georgia? We'll find out. Is Roderick Robinson coming off of injury ready to live up to the promise we once had for him? I don't know. Younger guys that have been here like Chauncey Bowens and Dwight Phillips, where do they fit into this? Cash Jones, you got to include him too. I don't know. But I've seen enough to believe that Bo Walker is going to play. And I do believe that Georgia's going to be happy to have him. And I get the suspicion that Walker's probably in line for a freshman season that is better than his recruiting ranking suggests it would be, even though he didn't have a bad recruiting ranking. This is just not a former 5-star or anything like that. I think that Walker's maybe ready to give Georgia a bit more than that. He would be third on my list of freshmen ready to make an immediate impact. I'm going to ask Jeff Sentell more about this in a moment. He'll give us his own names and we'll compare notes. The other freshman I would mention as one that I'm pretty sure is going to play, I'd put Talon Taylor, the former 5-star wide receiver, in there. And this is where, as I said before, this conversation has to include some critical analysis. It can't just be a recitation of the entire signing class, because if it's everybody, it's nobody. And I think you probably understand that. So why Taylor over, for instance, C.J. Wiley? A lot of us who put our ear to the ground were told that C.J. In fact, we got this confirmed on the show yesterday. Terrence Edwards confirmed this, that C.J. Wiley, another incoming freshman, had apparently an outstanding scrimmage for Georgia this past week. And I take that very seriously. I still think I have Taylor ranked over Wiley in terms of who might play right away. So I got 4 immediate impact freshmen. Juan Gaston, number 1. Elijah Griffin, probably number 2. I'd put Bo Walker, number 3. Talon Taylor, I'd put number 4. Very quickly, in a category of maybes, guys who could join the other group, I do have C.J. Wiley. I think Wiley's got a real chance. He would be, I guess, next on my list if you want to think of it that way. J.J. Hanna, the freshman defensive lineman, has gotten a lot of praise this fall camp. He's been wearing the blue cap, the Guardian cap. This is what you see sometimes in photos. As fire, passion, and energy guy, maybe he plays too. I'm less certain of that than I am of Elijah Griffin, but there's, I guess, always a chance. It seems like Georgia saw something in Hanna that the rest of the world maybe didn't see. That's always a good thing. And then my third maybe, and this is not a name you're going to hear very many other places, but we talked about this the other day. It's, I think, worth your attention. Georgia has seen an injury to its backup center. Injuries in the offensive line are a thing. Last year, we saw Drew Bobo play significant and important snaps for Georgia because Jared Wilson got hurt. Well, with Malachi Tolliver now injured, that means that Georgia's backup center, unless something changes, is himself a true freshman, and that is Cortez Smith. Now, Smith is a prospect that I'm really high on. And Smith is a name that we've brought up here before. If healthy, Drew Bobo is Georgia's center, and we think he's a good one. But offensive linemen often don't stay healthy for a full season. And if you're making a list of freshmen who could play, even though he's not nearly as famous as some of the other guys we're talking about, I think that Cortez Smith has to be on your list. That's a little bit of a surprise, but I do think that you should consider him in this discussion. Now, there are other big names who we think are going to have the potential for very bright careers at Georgia. I would say for the most part, not yet. Could be wrong. I often am. I am imperfect. I could be wrong about this. But the guys who I think could be very good later, maybe just not quite. Crowded position groups, fighting for playing time, kind of get caught up in the numbers game. I'd put the 2 tight ends, Elias Williams, Ethan Barbour in that. I'd put Isaiah Gibson in that, and I'd probably put Zayden Walker in that. Walker's apparently flashed some during fall camp, but that is a very crowded position group. So if you were to ask me 4 freshmen most likely to play, I'll give you Juan, Gaston, Elijah Griffin, Bo Walker, Talon Taylor. My next group of maybes would be the other wide receiver, C.J. Wiley, maybe J.J. Hanna, and keep your eye on Cortez Smith if Georgia were to have a crucial injury worth paying attention to. We'll talk to Jeff Sentell about that in a moment. That said, let me shift gears to something completely different. Our friends at ESPN have recently ranked their top 100 players in college football. Georgia, I'm going to use air quotes here, only had 3 names on the list. And there is a certain vantage point from which you can look at this, and sometimes we talk about this sort of thing, where it's, ESPN is sleeping on Georgia, ESPN is sleeping on ... Georgia player, and you could rattle off several names if you wanted to of players that are perhaps being overlooked by Georgia, or I should say overlooked by ESPN from Georgia. And maybe that's true. We certainly believe that if Georgia wins the national championship, it's going to have more than 3 top 100 level players. You just need more top end talent than that. If Georgia's going to win the championship, those guys are going to have to emerge. We've seen that happen from Georgia in the past. However, let me give you a little bit different spin on this, and maybe a more positive spin than ESPN didn't have enough Georgia players in its top 100. Let me instead say this. If one of the things, and by the way, the 3 players, one of them was K.J. Bolden, the other was C.J. Allen. The third I want to mention here right now. Christian Miller, defensive lineman, came in at number 56 on the list of top 100 players in college football, courtesy of ESPN. We'll show it to you on the screen, what they say about Miller. Obviously, a couple of injury-plagued seasons, but showed some flash a year ago. Mark Schlabach writing that, taking notice of all of this. And while 56 may seem relatively low, I want to give you some important context here. There are thousands of players who play college football. If Georgia really does have a defensive lineman that would count around the 50 best players in college football, do you know what kind of boost that would provide to Georgia's defense, to Georgia overall? We have said a lot in recent days and recent weeks that it seems kind of quiet around the Georgia defensive line. It seems like one of those things that, I don't know, sometimes no news is not good news. Georgia really wants to boost its performance with the defensive line compared to a year ago. Is it set up to do that? I don't know. We'll see. That's one of the unknowns that I can't emphatically say is definitely going to work out for Georgia. We just simply don't know. But boy, if ESPN could prove right about this, and if Miller could be a top 50-ish level player in the sport, I think that's great news. And in this particular case, I want to focus more on the positive of this, that I think this is a pretty big compliment for Miller overall. And I do think it sets the stage well for what really, truly could be a breakout season. We just talked about freshmen a moment ago. This is the opposite end of the spectrum. This is the veteran player who's been biding his time and overcoming injury and working, and now he has a chance to show the flash that might make him a first-round pick and lift the entire Georgia roster in the process of doing that. Earlier in this fall camp period, going back a couple of weeks ago, Kirby Smart has talked about what they want to see from Miller. And while Smart doesn't quite use this phrase, the notion of Miller taking a star turn and getting recognized by outlets like ESPN on a more regular basis seems like Kirby Smart at least sees the potential in that based on the description he recently offered. Here is Kirby on Christian Miller.
Yeah, we need him to be a playmaker. We need him to be disruptive. We talk about havoc. We talk about quickness, speed, experience. He's our most experienced player. He has taken on this role of knowing the burden lies with him to set a standard for that group. And if we're going to be good up front and we're going to stop the run, it starts with that group. I mean, it's everybody, but it really starts with the defensive line and what kind of mentality that room has. And so far, he has approached that the right way. He did not get to go through spring because of a labral repair, and we're looking for him to have a great fall camp and push the other guys and help lead that room along with Jordan and Xavier and some of those other guys.
That is one of my favorite Kirby Smart clips in recent memory. I think it tells a really good story. And the notion that the burden lies with Christian Miller and it's his responsibility to set the standard for the Georgia defensive line. We have reason to believe that's true. Other defensive linemen have said it. Let's go back to spring practice, for instance, when Jordan Hall was talking about. Hall is, after all, one of the guys in the defensive line. And Hall, who is a veteran himself and also attempting to come back from some injuries here, talked about the way in which he continues to be inspired by the way in which Christian Miller goes about his work. What Kirby Smart says Christian Miller needs to do, Jordan Hall has told us that Christian Miller does just that. This is Jordan Hall.
That's my guy. Yeah, that's my guy. You know, that's big, bro. I don't even tell him a lot, but I look up to him a lot. You know, he's been through a lot of things that I have. Like when I first got here, it was me and him and John Jefferson. He's gone now to SMU, but that's my guy since I first got here. You know, and I seen the transition he made and the leap he made last year. Like I don't know how much work we put in the offseason last season, so. You know, this year is a big year for him, a big year for our defensive line, but he's a leader in our room, and he has some special things coming for this season.
I think that sets up Christian Miller to be one of Georgia's most interesting players this year. If he really could be a top 50-ish level player in the country, ESPN suggested, Kirby Smart says they're pushing him in that direction, Jordan Hall says he sees Miller taking those steps, then whatever concern I have said I have about the Georgia defensive line, I would say, poof, that has vanished. You would assume that's probably gone. Now, it takes more than one really good defensive lineman to have a really good defensive line. That is a position where the ensemble does matter. You're rotating. You need multiple guys. It can't be just Miller. But if you do have one guy that's kind of playing at that first-round type level, I think it makes the other guys who fill in around that, I think it makes their job a lot easier. And it makes the overall fortunes for the group much more likely to be raised. So I would say the ESPN write-up, if I had my wish from their lips to God's ears, wouldn't it be great if Miller really could have that kind of season? And wouldn't it be awesome if one of our biggest preseason concerns could be satisfied and have the questions answered that emphatically once the season begins? Can't wait to find out. Christian Miller, very important player for Georgia here this season. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are happy that you are with us. We are live 10 a.m., happy to be at home today, back in studio on Monday. Most of you watch on demand. We're glad that you do. Honestly, just however you do it. Been around for a long time. Thankful that you stick with us. Thankful that you join us. Many of you kind of just discovering us for the first time. I really appreciate all of that. Really, really thankful and happy to have you here. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 96, The Ref podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. That means Apple, Spotify, everything in between. Thrilled that there is a platform out there that works for you. Could not do what we do without our friends at Kroger. They sponsor the show here today. I appreciate that. The next big event for us, one, at least in terms of the football season, 1 week from tomorrow, the Georgia season begins. That means many of you are putting the finishing touches on your tailgate preparations. You want to be at your best, or the game watching party at home. Our friends at Kroger want to help you get stocked up on all of that. You're going to love it. Food on the grill, the drinks in the cooler, the incredible array of plates, napkins, all the stuff you need for a great tailgate experience. Kroger's got you covered on all of that. And if you want more time to enjoy this football season, more money in your pocket to do the things you love during the football time of year, become a Kroger Boost member as well. You'll get free grocery delivery and pickup, whichever option you prefer. And the stuff that you're already buying at your local Kroger, how about twice the fuel points for every dollar that you spend? It's one of the reasons why Kroger Boost is such a popular option right now. Find out more online, Kroger.com/boost for that. That is Kroger.com/boost for that. All right. We have got a lot to do. I am perpetually late these days, so we'll see if we can pick up the pace. I also, and this is going to be dangerous because we're going to try to squeeze in a lot here, I want to run through 3 really quick programming notes to make you aware of a lot that we have going on with DawgNation right now. A couple of chances to see me out in person. Hope you'll do that. Also, more just really big stuff along the way. So let me start with this. Today is Friday. A couple of days from now on Tuesday, DawgNation Daily is going to broadcast live from the Cercheros in Alpharetta. Cercheros, big part of what we do here at DawgNation. We love them. This is the first time I've done a live broadcast from Cercheros. We're going to be there. It's the Alpharetta location. That's 91 South Main Street in Alpharetta. 91 South Main Street. Our show starts at normal time. Cercheros going to open at 10:30. So if you want to stop by and see us, get there maybe a little earlier than you normally eat lunch, but chance to come by and say hello, or if you come by later on, we'll still be there when the show's done, at least for a little bit. So come by and see us. We'd love to see you. Cercheros in Alpharetta on Tuesday. That's 91 South Main Street. Big part of our game days and season-long stuff. We love Cercheros. We love the fresh mix they're famous for. We will see you there on Tuesday in Alpharetta, 91 South Main Street. So there's that. Told you, next week a busy week for DawgNation because on Thursday, I am thrilled about a really fun event that's kind of just coming together. So this is one of those things where you got to listen fast on this because we got to act fast to make sure everybody knows about this. You may be familiar with the Red and Black. The Red and Black, the very famous student newspaper connected to the University of Georgia. Some of the best writers in the world got their start for the Red and Black. Well, next week, the Red and Black is hosting an event in Athens. My friends at the AJC have invited me to be a part of this too. In fact, I'm going to be moderating a discussion that features some of your favorite people in the world of college football. Mark Schlabach from ESPN. We just quoted Schlabach a moment ago. We'll speak to him this upcoming Thursday. David Pollock is going to be there. I love anything we get a chance to do with David. You're going to get a chance to be in the same room with David Pollock on Thursday and a guy that I consider a very good friend, Mr. College Football himself, Tony Barnhart. So Mark Schlabach, David Pollock, Tony Barnhart. This is going to take place. Now, yesterday, I kind of mispronounced this. That's just sort of what I do sometimes. It's Authentic Brewing. Obviously, a little bit of an homage to Athens. Authentic Brewing is the place to be. Tickets are $25. It's 7:30, and the proceeds obviously benefit the Red and Black. Next Thursday, 7:30 p.m., Authentic Brewing. A great chance to be with the Red and Black, my friends in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, an incredible panel. Mark Schlabach, David Pollock, Tony Barnhart. I'm thrilled to be able to moderate that. That's going to be an awesome experience. I want to give you a way to get the tickets here, and this is one of those things that you just got to, like I said, you got to listen fast on this. So if you'll go to it's bit.ly/DawgNation. It's one of those things, if you are on social media or something like that, you see the bit.ly link you can click. Well, obviously, you're listening or watching me right now. It's not a thing to click. I'm just describing it to you. This is the simplest way to get there the quickest if you want to be there. bit.ly/DawgNation. That bit.ly to get you to DawgNation. That's a link directly to the event at Authentic Brewing next week. Tony Barnhart, David Pollock, Mark Schlabach. I'm moderating. Red and Black is hosting it. Our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution are part of it too. Fun event in Athens that is next Thursday night. Final thing, and I'm going to be quick about this because you already know about this. DawgNation Invasion. Don't forget, go now to get your tickets. DawgNation.com/tailgate. Secure a T-shirt. Enjoy the paddle wheel riverboat tailgate, the buffet on the boat, the drinks, everything else. Don't lose sight of the fact that we're getting closer and closer, not just to the season starting, but also the big event, DawgNation Invasion, which comes up September 13th. DawgNation.com/tailgate for that. Okay, I know that's a lot. Any questions? Tuesday, Cercheros. Thursday, Authentic Brewing for the big season kickoff event with the Red and Black. And then DawgNation Invasion coming up September 13th. Reach out to me. I'll try to help you if you need help getting connected with any of that, including certainly tickets to the event on Thursday. Okay, that's it. Now, Jeff Sentell coming up. For now, though, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. So, yesterday, we talked about national media. They've noticed Georgia's got great wide receivers. There's a lot of excitement around that. It is true. There is also, we must report, because we try to be fair and balanced, sometimes anyway, the opposite side to that coin. That if there is a position group that is, boy, seems like Georgia's set up to do well there, you love hearing that. Wide receiver, we've heard some of that about. The flip side of that, same article from CBSSports.com, looking at its preseason top 25 teams. mentions a concern for Georgia, and it is, no surprise here, the same concern that many of you have. CBS raising questions about Georgia's edge rushing outside linebackers. Obviously, and we'll show you this on the screen, Elo Mendoza comes in as a transfer. Gabe Harris trying to step up. A little bit of a surprise, maybe from Saturday's scrimmage. A little bit of cross-training, inside linebackers, defensive ends. But for now, after the departure of Damon Wilson to Missouri and the kind of aging out of the program for guys like Chaz Chambliss and others, all of a sudden, the Georgia edge rushing outside linebacker feels like one of those spots where we're not quite so sure for Georgia here right now. I do think that is legitimately a lingering concern. I think it's fair that CBS has written about that. So before we bring on Jeff Sentell, let's talk about what Kirby Smart has said about this. Around the subject of kind of cross-training here for a moment, that there's a guy named Gabe Harris who I think that Harris is maybe poised to be a big part of what Georgia does defensively this season. Some of that's going to be as the traditional 3-4 defensive end. Maybe not exclusively. Maybe he'll stand up and play edge rusher sometimes too. And functionally, how he operates in a defense, hand on the ground or not, it still may be the same impact on the unit overall. And hopefully the same level of havoc being wreaked on opposing offenses one way or the other. Earlier this week, Kirby Smart talked about Gabe Harris. This is what he said.
What stood out as far as what he did fall camp, he did what he was supposed to do. He's executing probably at a higher rate than he did this time last year. He didn't go through spring practice, so we've had to balance what is the right number of reps to get him in shape and get him better, but not wear him down as a 270-pound, 65, 70-pound guy that he's having to fill some big shoes that have played here in the past between Ty Ingram and Michael and those guys. That's a role that he's serviced, and he's done a nice job doing what we asked.
I take that pretty seriously. I do believe guys who've been here, guys who know the situation, I think sometimes those are the players you ought to look at more closely as who could really provide some solutions for Georgia. I think that Harris could be one of those guys. We've talked plenty about it. There is another player, though, that we really don't talk much about at all, and I am perpetually imperfect. One of the imperfections I have is, so a couple of years ago, Georgia signed what we thought were two really good linebackers from Virginia. Both of them happen to be named Chris. And so sometimes Chris Cole, Chris Jones, kind of, I don't know, they kind of go together in my mind a bit. You almost forget that they're two separate players. Cole probably has gotten more attention than Jones, certainly on this show thus far. But it sounds like Chris Jones had himself a nice scrimmage for Georgia on Saturday. And that sounds like Chris Jones may be ready to be more than just the other linebacker from Virginia named Chris, that he himself got good length. He himself has an opportunity to craft out a role in this defense, and that could be part of the solution for Georgia at edge rushing outside linebacker. This is also what Kirby said about Chris Jones the other day after what we're told was, hey, maybe a promising scrimmage behind closed doors on Saturday.
Well, he helps us because he has length. He has the ability to play on tackles. We multi-purpose those guys. There's not an outside linebacker that hadn't been here that we don't ask to stack, fall over the top. Play goes away, you become an inside backer, play to you. You got to be able to play on offensive tackles and set edges, and he's able to do both those things. He's grown a lot at that position. He continues to grow. He's a kid that we want to be able to develop as both inside linebacker, outside linebacker. He does some packages on third down that allow him to play stack back and rush from standing up, things he's done in the past. So it really it helps our team. He's got the ability to be versatile.
Generally speaking, I'm bullish on Georgia for this year. I'm optimistic this team can be at least as good this season as it was last season. I believe they have a chance to be better. But if we're going to have a real conversation about Georgia, we have to acknowledge that there are some lingering questions. I don't know how many there are bigger than this position. It's the kind of position where some defenses have their very best player. That's not often the case for Georgia. But knowing who your contributors are at the edge rushing outside linebacker spot, I do think that's worth paying attention to. And that's one of the answers that fans will be seeking as the season begins. That's also around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. If you or someone you love has been injured or bitten by a dog, negligence on the part of the owner creates pain and suffering, medical bills, things like that, just like any other personal injury situation, we think you deserve your chance to fight for compensation. That is what Zagoria Law is going to provide you the opportunity to do. And they specialize in this very narrow aspect of personal injury law. So I want you to give them a call. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. Dog spelled D-O-G. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. Online, ZagoriaLaw.com. Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com. They literally, I mean literally in this case, wrote the book on how to win these types of cases. So if you or someone you love has been injured, bitten by a dog, negligent on the part of the owner, that's a serious situation. Can be a problem for you. So trust our friends from Zagoria Law to fight to get what you deserve in this personal injury space. They're experts in it. It's Zagoria Law bringing around the Doghouse to us here today. All right, let's go now back to where we were at the very beginning of the show. Impact freshmen, the specific names most likely to be it. Let's talk about all that here right now. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, as we bring on Jeff Sentell.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Jeff Sentell covered all these guys as recruits, so he's a great person to speak to about this right now. And Jeff, the general rule here is if you mention everybody, you're mentioning nobody. That's essentially just noise at that point. So it's important to winnow this down to the true list of most likely impact freshmen for Georgia this year. And in that spirit, I have 4. I gave them to the audience earlier. I'll restate them for you right now. Number 1 on my list, probably by a fairly wide-ish margin, is Juan Gaston. I believe he's one of Georgia's 5 best offensive linemen based on what I've been told. Elijah Griffin for me is number 2. I believe he will play. I think Trayvon Walker, Jalen Carter comp from a freshman year, probably reasonable on that. That means contributor, but not among Georgia's most dominant players on defense, I don't believe. I think he'll occasionally flash. My next 2 would be Bo Walker, Talon Taylor, and it would be that 4 with some separation for my next group. Let me let you jump in. What do you think about that list so far?
Good morning, BA. I've got to ask for a clarifier. That's a good list, but I got to ask for a clarifier. Can I stretch the boundaries of freshmen to include redshirt freshmen?
I kind of don't want to do that. I mean, you can mention a redshirt freshman just for fun, but I mean, I would certainly hope Georgia's redshirt freshmen are playing all over the place. Ellis Robinson, et cetera. It's time for them to do that. So you can mention them, but I do think getting a little spice from your incoming freshman class, because it's not easy to do at a place like Georgia, I just think that's more impactful potentially. But feel free to mention whoever you want, but it's really the incoming freshmen that I think are maybe more interesting in a conversation like this.
Very good. So to put this in perspective, I'm going to mention a name. I expect Ellis Robinson, the 4th, to be in comparison to all these other true freshmen that I'm going to name, I expect Ellis to be the impact redshirt freshman, true freshman in this group. Guys, you've heard me talk about him for, I believe, 3 years now. Highest rated Georgia signee ever outside of Justin Fields. Just needed to get him a little bit bigger, just needed to be able to take on a few things in the SEC, needed to be over a certain weight threshold. I think he's all that. He's going to turn the ball over. Now, as far as the 5 freshmen, I think he split the bit with maybe 1 or 2 of those. You know, it's really hard not to say Gaston, but I like, you know, I guess this is my hopeful, optimistic, what Georgia needs pecking order here. Brandon, I'm going to go Talon Taylor 1, simply because I saw what Ryan Williams did in the SEC last year. I saw what Jeremiah Smith. Now, Jeremiah Smith might be the first round overall, number 1 overall pick. He came out in this upcoming 2026 NFL draft. But I think Talon can be really special. Now, is he going to get buried a little bit by Zach Branch? Is he going to get buried a little bit by Sakobe White? Likely so. But I think it's a 15-game season for a reason. You're going to see attrition. I like Gaston 2nd. I like Griffin 3rd, and then I like Walker 4th. Those would be my, you know, most impactful incoming true freshmen. But, you know, for that last spot, Brandon, I also want to think about the true freshman that's only been playing football for a handful of years, and that's JJ Hane. I believe he earned his Fire, Passion, Energy Blue Guardian cap earlier than anybody we've been speaking about so far.
Yeah, so my next group, like I guess the runners up, if you will, the guys that could join the top group. I have CJ Wiley. I do have JJ. Are we saying Hane? Is that what we're saying?
I believe that's the pronunciation, yes.
And then the third one that I had on there is a total wild card, but I do believe it's a name that people need to file away, and that's Cortez Smith. In the event that Drew Bobo gets injured last year, Georgia starting center did get injured. I think that pretty quickly Cortez Smith could become a pretty important freshman on this team. With all due respect to Cortez, I don't want that to happen this year. I hope it's some future year. But previous precedent would lead us to believe that Georgia fans might have to think about their backup center at some point. Obviously, Malachi Tolliver is now injured. Smith would be a guy I would say to file away here. So I have Hane, if that's the pronunciation we're using, along with C.J. Wiley in my next group. And I do respect Fire, Passion, and Energy. I just don't know how many truly young defensive linemen are really all that likely to play for Georgia. And I'm wrong frequently. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I can't put JJ in the same category of Elijah Griffin. I just can't do that.
Yeah, it kind of be interesting because, I mean, JJ might come in on certain spots, certain packages. You know, when you start thinking about all these names, Brandon, I think there's one, if you've went to your tier 2, I'm assuming you went to your tier 2. Here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that there's a level of improvement Elias Williams needs to make, but it's not light years. Like if gradual kind of freshman year improvement, I think Elias Williams can quickly get in the pecking order where he's right there with maybe right up in the first group, maybe with where Riddell was coming in strong, and then also where Lucky has kind of always been. I think Elias is going to be a problem sooner rather than later in Athens. And I think the best part of this kind of thought tree exercise, Brandon, is we've covered a bunch of names, and I think we're just now mentioning a guy who was the number 1 tight end or number 2 tight end in the country where you look at. And I also want to give the proper flowers here to Bo Walker, Brandon, because I think there's a world where Bo Walker pretty quickly in SEC play easily is Georgia's number 2 or number 3 back. And this is the thing that I was told to look for back when Georgia first got a commitment from Bo Walker. This is kind of way back in the Dell McGee era, is wait until Bo Walker gets behind the typical Georgia line, 6'7", 6'8", 350, some of those Juan Gaston types. Wait until that happens. And when he does, he is going to be very hard to identify and tackle at the second level because he's just going to hide behind those guys. He's going to look like Spider-Man out there. And I think Bo Walker, tough, hard to get down, understands it, played at a high level. I think Bo Walker is probably going to be the most fantasy football stat friendly of maybe all these names we've mentioned in the top group here.
Yeah, so I'm quite confident that Walker's going to play. That's why I had him in my top group. As far as like the fantasy football stuff on that, I guess we'll see. But he's definitely going to play. He's definitely going to be in the rotation. Let me also mention 2 other names that you talked about. And, you know, for instance, you mentioned Elias Williams. I've got a group of 4 guys that I would put in I think their futures at Georgia are really bright. I don't think their moments right now. Williams would be one of those guys, and I mentioned this earlier. The fact of the matter is, as impressive as Williams is going to look getting off the bus, he's very tall. I have a hard time believing that. I mean, we still haven't even seen Jaden Riddell play a lot at Georgia yet, and I believe that Riddell is likely to play more for Georgia this season. We know that Delp and Lawson Lucky are going to play plenty, and I think that there's got to be a spot for Riddell. I just think, once again, trusting people who know more than me, I think that Riddell is ready to do it. And so now, if we're talking about a 3rd tight end ready to get some serious run for Georgia, there's just not that much room for more tight ends than that right now, barring injury. So for a guy like Barbour, who I thought was a very productive high school player, for a guy like Elias Williams, who's one of these remarkable-looking specimens, you know, very tall, very athletic for his height. I think he moves well for a tall guy. I just can't have that being right now. I don't believe that you have to ground this in reality. And I do believe there are other tight ends who we haven't seen play very much yet, who I have to assume are ahead of Williams right now. unless something really drastic changes.
I mean, Brandon, I just anticipate the season, man, the grind of this year. I just anticipate guys getting dinged up, and maybe Georgia finally gets that, I guess, unicorn moment in the second half where they're up 30 against an FCS or a non-Power 4 opponent, and then you get to feature a lot of the backup quarterbacks and also the backup guys. I mean, the name I keep hearing, Brandon, about Elias is like LeBron James. He's like that type of athlete on a football field, just so big. I think if Mike Bobo ever gets into his bag, I mean, he's going to find something for Elias Williams in the red zone kind of to deal with right there. And, everybody laughs about that run the DAM in 13 personnel, but this is a guy that
you can say damn if you want to.
Hey, Brandon, you're in your home, man. Children might be listening, man.
We're pretty family friendly, but I'll allow a run the damn ball if you want to say that.
All right, brother. But I mean, you've got him, and he's kind of a tantalizing down the board type guy. But you think about with Walker, I mean, I don't want to say fantasy football numbers and think this guy's, going to go be a stats behemoth. But there's a real world where I sit there and say, Bull Walker's going to have 450 yards and 5 touchdowns this year, and maybe 150 receiving and another touch. And I think he would take those numbers right now for an impact freshman running back at Georgia.
Yeah, I definitely would be very happy to have that kind of contribution from Walker. Like I said before, I think he is going to play. The other name that you mentioned, after this, I want to talk about some current recruiting stories. You mentioned Talon Taylor. And once again, here's where I have to at least attempt to ground this, what I believe reality is, which is I do think that Taylor is going to play. If I had to suspect, he may be slightly ahead of CJ Wiley right now. I'm often wrong, maybe wrong about that.
Yeah.
But I do suspect he probably is slightly ahead of Wiley right now, even though Wiley, we're told, had a great scrimmage on Saturday. However, I do think one of the legitimate pieces of rumor mill innuendo that I do take pretty seriously is I think the Georgia wide receivers have had themselves a pretty good run so far this calendar year. And I think there's a lot of touches to be had by Georgia wide receivers, and there's only one football. And so if we're saying, veteran, whether former transfers like London Humphreys and Colby Young, new year transfers like Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas, guys like that, I think, are going to be involved in this offense. And it's only natural then it would reduce the kind of fantasy style numbers that Talon Taylor could put up, to use the phrase you used a moment ago.
Yeah, here's what I see with Talon, Brandon. And I see, what is it that makes the elite receiver different? And that means you don't need to dial anything up. You don't need to scheme him up. He can create separation on his own, Brandon. And for Talon, while it is a loaded Georgia receiving room, I'm going to trumpet the fact that I think it's the best wide receiver room of the Kirby Smart era right now. I don't think there's a lot of guys that can instantly get separation on their own. If you look at it, a guy like Noah Thomas, he's really fast. Colby Young, those are guys that are going to win with their size, their catch radius, their bodies. The sudden movement, the twitchiness. I don't know if there's really a lot of smooth players in that room quite like Talon. Now, Zach Branch is certainly that guy. Like, one of the things about Zach Branch, I don't know if the average DawgNation fan realizes this, Brandon. He was the former #1 wide receiver in the country that's now on the Georgia roster, Brandon. I might tax your mental powers here, Brandon. Can you ever tell me the former #1 wide receiver in the country that was playing in the red and black?
I mean, the closest I could come to would be Reggie Brown. Was Reggie Brown going back early 2000s? Was he a #1 overall wide receiver? That's the closest I can come to thinking, because obviously Pickens was a 5-star, but not the #1 receiver.
Yeah.
Reggie Brown would be the closest. AJ Green, I guess, after that too, I guess would be. So Reggie Brown, AJ Green, I guess those would be the two, right?
This is how tough that question is, Brandon. Back when Reggie Brown was around, they didn't rank the receivers 1 through 20. This was before the modern recruiting era of like stars and everything else. Like, the funny story about AJ Green, and I'm not going to digress too much here, but I think it's a good point. AJ Green was the #1 wide receiver in the country. He had some of the best sophomore and junior film ever that will ever be out there. But he was not a marketing headline for his senior year. He did not have 5 hats on the table. He didn't stretch in his senior year.
That's right.
Julio Jones jumps him. Julio Jones goes to #1. So AJ would never finish his career as a #1 wide receiver in the country. So, Brandon, I'm going to say this because unless there's some poll out there that maybe Auburn might find or claim when they start claiming national championships, but Zach Branch is the first #1 true overall wide receiver in the Georgia Kirby Smart era.
That's really interesting, Jeff. That's a very interesting fact. Can I give you a AJ Green related fact here for a moment?
Drop it, man.
Curiosity about AJ Green's high school film is what caused me to discover what YouTube was. I found out about YouTube because of AJ Green, that there was this video platform that had highlights of Green.
Yeah.
I sought it out and like, oh, this YouTube thing's kind of interesting, but who would my thought was, well, it's cool that there's video on here, but who would take the time to put something on YouTube? That's what I thought at the time. You can add that to the list of predictions that didn't quite work out, because apparently the entire universe now does that. But AJ Green is what caused me to discover what YouTube was.
I would say top 5 films ever. Brendan, it's one of those things you can play roulette with the film. You could go into any portion of the 12-minute highlight tape. The guy's highlight tape was 12 minutes as a sophomore and as a junior year. Not his senior year, never needed to make one. But you could go in any stretch, like the 6-minute mark, and grab 40 seconds, and you can find 3 plays that where you're like, I only need to see those 3. I'm offering that guy.
All right, so I've kept you late. I want to be respectful of your time, but let's kind of rattle through a couple of recruiting stories here just for a moment. You wrote a great story about Justice Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick committed to Georgia. You heard some rumblings. Then he shut it down, and somehow the shutting it down didn't quite shut the rumblings down. What's next for Justice Fitzpatrick in Georgia? A lot of this 2026 recruiting stuff the rest of the way is going to be about holding on to the guys you have. Is Georgia going to hold on to Justice Fitzpatrick?
Brandon, I think they are, as much as we could ever put 10 toes down on a prediction like that, because I think this goes back to maybe 10, 12 years, Brandon. And what I mean by that is when Minka was being recruited by Kirby and Nick Saban and that staff in Tuscaloosa, that's when the relationships hit bedrock status there with the Fitzpatrick family. Here's a funny story. There's an interview of Minka online where somebody asked him, and it sounds like a very young reporter. Somebody asked him, he's like, how's your brother feel about you going to Georgia with him being Alabama and all? And he's like, well, not really cool, kind of weird, but then it's Kirby. So we know Kirby for so long. We've trusted Kirby for so long now. Brandon, I know that those Texas oil wells are still going to pump from between now and December. And I know Miami is going to do its thing. And I think Miami is intriguing because I think they're very generous with their NIL, but also his older brother, Minka, is now playing for the Dolphins. So that's like definitely like a chance for the family to have all the boys there close to home. But I think it matters there with Kirby. And, one of the things I was told about Minka is that he was looking for something more than just facilities and scheme. He was looking for true relationships. He's got that with Kirby. He feels that way with Coach Dante as well. And, the other thing I've got to stress here, Brandon, because I know, faith, it matters a great deal to all of us. And I was told that the Fitzpatrick family is a very prayerful family. And this wasn't just a visit high commitment where he chose Georgia over the summer and then shut it down and canceled all his other visits to places like Ohio State and Florida and Miami, Texas, places like that. It's because they prayed about it, they thought about it, and they felt that he was being led. The best place for him was at Georgia, Brandon. One other thing about Justice that really, stands out here is he's a 10-7 guy, really explosive. There's a lot to like about him in his game, but we must say this. The reason why Justice Fitzpatrick has got to keep hold on. Georgia's got to play D on flips. They got to hunker down and hold on to him. It's because of, I would say, the serious charges facing Chase Calicut, the other kind of true recruited cornerback in this class. That's what makes Justice even more important than his family legacy and his rankings.
Well, I can say this. I've been praying for the Fitzpatrick family as well, and God has also revealed to me that Justice Patrick should stay with Georgia. So apparently
wow.
we're all on the same page about that. Of course, I say kiddingly. I loved your story with Caden Prothrow. I think the Prothrow story, there's a lot more layers to that. I think he's a really interesting prospect. This is a guy that Georgia's always been interested in, even with other tight ends getting some attention. Prothrow's always been a big deal. Turning down big money from Texas. Georgia fans like that kind of thing right now. And I think that Georgia fans, as they acquaint themselves more deeply with Prothrow, are going to really like this young man. I thought our commitment special with Prothrow going back to the summer was fantastic. And I just think his commitment to Georgia seems like a special one.
I think it was interesting, Brandon, because given what we know now about that moment, I'm gonna throw out some word association names, Brandon. I want you to tell me if this just feels like which one of these is not like the others. Jaden Johnson, Tyler Atkinson, Derek Cooper, Caden Prothrow. What do all those guys have in common back in June, right?
Yeah.
All those guys wanted to be dogs. The dogs wanted them to be dogs. And Texas came in and lassoed all of them except for Caden Prothro, and they even levied a significant financial offer towards Caden. And the Prothros, man, they're very very down to earth. They're a very hometown. They're a very simple. They're a very rooted, anchored family. And they told me at the beginning of this recruitment, it's like, man, it's not going to be the money here. It's going to be development, and it's going to be a feeling. And that's what they found at Georgia. I thought it was interesting in that interview because there was a lot to talk to Caden about, because there's been about, is he a receiver? Is he a tight end? Is he going to do both? He's basically played a lot of wide receiver at all the camps, especially at Bowden High School. And he told me for the first time, it's like, I probably need to end up at tight end because that's where he will make the biggest mark professionally. And whoever's in his ear, Brandon, they've got that right, because there's going to reach a point where there's not going to be a lot of separation he's going to get from high-grade SEC and NFL corners. And the matchup possibilities are going to be far greater for his side of the ball when he's playing at tight end.
All right, very quick final question, respectful of your time. Appreciate your information as always. Another guy that you've recently highlighted at DawgNation is a name of note for the class of 2027, and it's time to be thinking about these guys. In many cases, junior year, most important year in your high school career. This is where I think you demonstrate the type of player that you are. And for Georgia, it's a legacy, of course, but it's also one of the top players in our state. That's David Jacobs Jr. We'll call him DJ Jacobs from Blessed Trinity, with LaDamian Guyton taking big dollars to go to Texas Tech, at least for now. See if that holds forever. But with that going down with Guyton, a guy like Jacobs, similar position, becomes all the more important for Georgia. It was going to be anyway because of the legacy, but even more important now, right?
Yeah, it is. And, Brandon, the first thing that comes to my mind is, they talk about legacies. Well, the first thing is, I think he'll command every bit of that 9-figure payday that Guyton, or he'll at least command it.
To be fair, 9 figures is $100 million.
To be fair. 7-figure paydays. Let me get that. Let me get on track here, man. We're all infallible humans, man. That's what we do.
I get it. I just want to make sure the NIL hadn't gotten that crazy yet.
Maybe a package deal, man. But so the other thing about DJ, and this is something I had to learn, Brandon, is DJ is, everybody just shortened his name, David Jacobs, to DJ. He's not actually a true junior at all. His dad loved this story. His mom and dad wanted him to be different. Well, initially it was David, who's like, he wants a different middle name for his son. So think about that, where this world was at, Brandon, like 15, 16, 17 years ago. Perhaps the coolest movie for a guy's movie, a man cave movie, had to be Gladiator, right? Had to be, right?
Sure.
Isn't that the one that Ray Lewis watched over and over during that Super Bowl run or whatever for the Ravens? But they named him Maximus. So his actual middle name is David Maximus Jacobs. Everybody calls him DJ.
Man, I wish my middle name was Maximus.
Hey, can you change Charlie's middle name? How are you going to work that with Gina? Can you do that? Can you name him something?
I wish I could have.
Farron or Herschel or something like that?
Maybe I'll go to the courthouse and see if we can make that happen. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And the funny thing, and this is a good little recruiting pitch, is like, it was a cool name. Most guys would say, man, really cool name, right? He had to go to his wife and say, hey, dear, can we name him Maximus? Can we make his middle name Maximus? And the smart lady, she rolled with it. She was a Georgia Bulldog too. These are double dogs in the family. And I think the thing, like, this is the human touch we want to give to this story, Brandon. You meet David Jacobs, and he's one of those people, much like yourself, sir, that when you meet him, you walk away from him thinking, that's a good dude. But also what the other person is thinking is, I hope I made a good impression on them. And I hope I gave them a picture of my best self, because you never know what they're going through. They may be having a bad day. So I wanted to give them, more than just basic human kindness and decency. Like, he wants to leave every interaction with someone making their day a little bit better. And that's what he's looking for at College Football Fit. He's looking for that. He's looking for true relationship, a true connection. That's why he's at Blessed Trinity. Brandon, that young man runs the school already. Like, he could be given the school tour, taking people around, show them the biology lab, the chemistry lab, the locker rooms, the auditorium. He could do all that. And there's a very Tim Tebow-like quality to him already, where he's just kind of going to be the poster board for everything around your program. And of course, the dogs are in it. I think the only places he'll go, Brandon, will be places that have produced. And what I mean by that is, you can throw me all the money you want, but I need to see your defensive NFL development. And for a place like Texas Tech, I don't think they would qualify because they haven't placed the dudes in the NFL quite like a lot of SEC programs have. But he's going to visit Georgia for the Alabama game. That's very interesting. He's going to visit FSU, Alabama as well. Also wants to see Texas A&M host Florida. He's not in the business of naming top schools, but we can kind of follow his path and see which schools he's visiting. And the schools he's visiting are obviously the ones he's very keen on.
Jeff, I appreciate it. Awesome stuff. Thank you so much for your time. Hope you have a great weekend. It'll be our final weekend without Georgia football for quite some time, although we do have some week 0 to enjoy. So hope you do just that. I'm sure you'll be all over the high school scene tonight, and I'll look forward to reading everything you write at DawgNation.com and speak to you back here again very soon on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
Hey, Brandon, take it easy, buddy. See you later, man.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, David Jacobs Jr., one of the great players, or DJ Jacobs, I guess not David Jacobs Jr., but DJ Jacobs, one of the great players here in the state of Georgia for Blessed Trinity, and we love high school football in Georgia. In fact, I'll see you tonight, Petrie Sports Network, Atlanta News First, that's Channel 46, as we get ready to watch Woodward Academy host Collins Hill. You talk about great players, Blake Stewart on Woodward Academy on his way to Clemson, a pair of outstanding defensive linemen for Collins Hill, Deuce Geralds, who's really close to setting the all-time state record for sacks. So Collins Hill, Woodward Academy, going to be a great game. We call it our Great Atlanta Bash. It's going to be from Woodward Academy tonight. We'll have it for you, Atlanta News First, Channel 46, also simulcast on the Petrie Sports Network. Can't wait to see you for that. Also can't wait to see you at some point in time on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation as we go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And you should know, anytime I'm planning a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, the thing that I'm looking for is, what are the ships that are going to Perfect Day Coco Cay? It is still, for me, after everything we talk about with the Royal Caribbean, the thing that is the absolute best for me about Royal Caribbean, that private island in the Bahamas, perfect oasis exclusively for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I would encourage you, if you've never been on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, start with this. Which ships are going to Perfect Day Coco Cay? How can I get on one of those? And so many of them do, whether it's going on a Port Canaveral, Star of the Seas, or Utopia of the Seas, or if you're thinking about Wonder of the Seas, Icon of the Seas. So many of the great ships sail out of their various ports on their way to Perfect Day Coco Cay. I think you should find one that's going there. I think you should go there. The thrill side with the tallest water slide in North America. The entire water park experience is great. The chill side, if you like that, there's the Hideaway Beach, kind of the adults only enclave. If you want the sort of Vegas pool party vibe, whatever you're into, you can get it. Perfect Day Coco Cay. Jessica Slater can tell you how to get there. Give her a call. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. We don't typically do just one story for our cruise around the SEC, but it is just the one today because it's a pretty big story. It came out yesterday, not speculation. This is happening, confirmed, announced by the league. The SEC is moving to a 9-game conference schedule. Now, the point I want to make here is that I think this is good for the SEC, for those of us kind of within the SEC footprint that care about the SEC. I think this is what matters. There are a handful of rivalries that I think deserve to be preserved. Not every SEC team has more than one. Georgia happens to be one. I will tell you that I feel like over time, the Georgia-Auburn rivalry, for instance, has started to feel like it doesn't quite matter to a certain brand of Georgia fan, most of them younger, as much as it used to. And I'm not just comparing this to when I was a kid. I'm comparing this to when my kids were born. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. I feel like the nature of the Georgia-Auburn rivalry has changed just within the last decade. So I was pretty fearful it might go away with the 9-game conference schedule, the belief that there will be 3 permanent opponents. It seems like now it might not. I think that's a good thing. Georgia was always going to play Florida every year, no matter what, because a good Georgia fan is a Gatorade first and foremost, as we've said for years. But the Georgia-Auburn rivalry matters too. It's the Deep South's oldest. It looks like it's going to survive. I think that's a good thing. Who will Georgia's 3rd permanent opponent be? It seems like there's been some movement with this over the course of time. At one point in time, I was fairly certain it might be South Carolina, a team that Georgia hasn't played the last 2 years. South Carolina historically has viewed Georgia, I believe, as its biggest SEC rival. Georgia and South Carolina even played yearly when I was a kid before South Carolina came to the SEC. This was this was a series that took place for Georgia every year, whether it was a rivalry or not. Then we were led to believe, well, South Carolina told the SEC they didn't want to play Georgia every year, that they already play Clemson every year. They didn't want to play Georgia every year, too. We were told that. That was a fairly substantial rumor. So then it turned into Georgia might play Kentucky every year, which, given the fact that over the course of a half century, Florida and Auburn are going to be good more often than not so much lately, but measured over the course of multiple decades, Georgia has fairly upper tier continuous opponents. It might be nice to get a little bit of a break from the schedule makers with a team like Kentucky. Maybe that's what will happen. Georgia fans also like traveling to Lexington. The team that won't be is Tennessee. Some Georgia fans have assumed that their third biggest SEC rival is Tennessee, so therefore that'll be the permanent opponent. Tennessee wants the easier games. It's going to ask for Vanderbilt, Kentucky. We'll probably get that. They also have something of a historic rivalry with both those teams, and it'll also have to play Alabama each year. So it won't be Tennessee. It's probably going to be Kentucky or South Carolina, and I guess we'll find out what happens. But I would say one of those two ends up being Georgia's third permanent opponent. The other reason why I think this is good for the SEC overall is, in order to explain this, I have to ask an impolite question. We know Georgia won the SEC last year, but was Georgia actually the SEC's best team compared, for instance, to Ole Miss that beat Georgia pretty bad? Well, when it's all said and done, Georgia's got the championship. That's all that really matters. But I think we would agree the process that put Georgia and Texas in the SEC championship compared to some different teams was a little bit random. The tiebreakers are kind of confusing, and the 9-game conference schedule, I think, makes the various tiebreakers in future years a bit more sensible. And in some of those years, Georgia will benefit from that. That there were a glut, for instance, of 9-3 teams a year ago: Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina. I think those teams would have loved some way to differentiate themselves from each other. South Carolina, for instance, beat Clemson. That's a pretty good team. And yet, record-wise, they couldn't quite separate from Ole Miss and Alabama because South Carolina lost to both Ole Miss and Alabama. That it was just kind of a mess. I would say a 9-game conference schedule makes future league easier to sort out and will make, assuming we still have an SEC and the SEC still crowns a champion, it'll make crowning that champion, I would say, a little easier to do. For that reason, I am in favor. What does not matter to me at all is the thing that the national media is fixating on. And between like the brand new Cracker Barrel logo and the way the national media covers the SEC, at this point in time, I'm about as radicalized as somebody can be. Can't imagine being more radicalized than I have become. But nonetheless, I think that there's this fixation. Well, the SEC has finally caved into the Big Ten's demands that it goes to a 9-game conference schedule. Now that makes playoff expansion a little bit more palatable. I don't care about any of that. I find all of that to be completely uninteresting. As we've said before, it is empirically true, measured with data, that the SEC already plays tougher schedules than the Big Ten teams do. This is before you even get into the non-conference games that SEC teams also play as mandated by league rule. And yet you never hear any of this, and the silence to a certain extent must be deafening. Hopefully it is to you. It obviously is for me. They don't say that the SEC already plays tougher schedules. You probably never hear this from anything other than a Georgia-centric show like this, that in future years, currently, Georgia's scheduled to play 11 Power 4 conference teams, Power 4 teams on its schedule in future years because of all the non-conference series it has signed to go with what is now an expanded SEC. You don't hear that. Alabama's doing the same thing. You don't hear that either. And at a certain point, you just sort of have to assume that must be for a reason, and I'll let you decide for yourself what that reason is. So how the 9-game conference schedule plays with national media types and other leagues, frankly, I am totally uninterested in any of that. I think it's good for the SEC overall. That's why it matters to us. And I would suggest that's what should matter to you. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, down here in SEC country, one of the things we love are the great agricultural community folks that just make this a great place to live. And one of those for us is a brand new sponsor. And so before we wrap up the week, I want to give a great shout out, at least a shout out to a great group of folks, our friends from Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. Now, this is the story from Mercier Orchards. You can drive there right now. It's in beautiful Blue Ridge, Georgia, couple of 100 acres of orchards. They're growing apples and all kinds of fruits and everything that kind of goes along with that. And it's a great place to visit. It's just gorgeous. And when you're there, you can eat the apple pies and all the kind of things they have. But if you can't get to Mercier Orchards, believe it or not, Mercier Orchards can come to you via the Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. And before we started talking about Mercier Orchards here in the show, this was a brand new category of beverage for me. Not something I have a lot of experience with, the hard cider. But I'll tell you right now, I became a fan almost right away. And if you're at a bar or a restaurant, many places are going to have Mercier Orchards Hard Cider on tap. Also at your local supermarket, you can find it at a supermarket, beverage stores, things like that. You can get it specially canned just for you. You can bring it home with you. And I'm going to encourage you to give Mercier Orchards Hard Cider a try. So many of our folks have. They love it, whether it's the Grumpy Granny, which is a little bit tart, the Just Peachy, which is obviously much sweeter. It is an awesome experience if you want a hard cider. It's an alcoholic beverage, a hard cider that is really delicious. All kinds of flavor notes combined together. It's honestly an experience that I didn't know you could have. I really enjoy it far more than I ever imagined I would. Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. If you don't see it at your local supermarket or wherever you buy your beverages, ask for it. Ask them to stock it. That'd be a huge help to them. So find out more online. It's Mercier, that's Mercier, mercier-orchards.com/hard-cider. Mercier-orchards.com/hard-cider. If you're watching a video, you can see it. But if you'll just search Mercier Orchards Hard Cider, that may be the easiest way to find it. From Blue Ridge, Georgia, grown locally right here, but available to you wherever you happen to be. Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. I hope you'll check it out today. All right, to close out the week, my final show from home, back in studio on Monday. We'll give you a couple of golden shoes here, starting with our first one. And, of course, last night I had the great privilege of being with Kaylee Manziel for DawgNation at Large. My first time doing that with Kaylee. She does an awesome job running that show. And we had some folks checking in, including Captain McKay, who writes in via X to say that he enjoyed DawgNation at Large while on a 3.18-mile run. 37 minutes, 4:54 seconds. That's a pretty good time, I would say, for that run. Far quicker than I'd be able to do a 3-mile run. So we appreciate you taking it with us. Makes me feel like I got a little exercise, too. Never a bad thing. Thank you so much for DawgNation at Large, listening and watching that. Us here on the program, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. All of that greatly appreciated. Also, one more golden shoe to give out today. It's that time of year where great parents are getting their young kids ready for the upcoming season. That means teaching them how to say go dog, sick 'em, and all those great Saturday cheers. Our good friend Hunter Jones, who's a frequent contributor to us and just a Georgia fan many of you know from social media, writing in to say that his son Truett's getting ready for those fall Saturdays, and it's almost there. And there was a great video attached to that, teaching Truett how to say go dogs. That's just good parenting as far as I'm concerned. To the entire Jones family, we'll give golden shoes for that. Lousy, stinking Gators, we'll give them the boot, but no golden shoe, about 1,749 days. That is how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy week 0. Enjoy all kinds of fun stuff. High school football tonight. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. The R.S. Andrews Cool Down here across all video platforms. They show up on time, do the work that's promised. The price is promised, taking care of you when it comes to your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. I meant to give a couple of week 0 notes. I'll give a couple of those to you here right now if you're interested. Obviously, the big game is the rivalry known as Farmageddon. Kansas State, Iowa State happen to be playing in Ireland. I'm looking forward to the game. I don't really have an opinion on it. I do kind of like if you wanted to bundle the preseason favorites in the Big 12, the highest win total, for instance, Kansas State's one of those, around 8.5. My general theory, and I'm not saying go out and do this, and this is one of those things where we've said we're going to try to limit our gambling talk, but it's still somewhat interesting to think about some of this from a point spread, odds, makerish perspective. As a general rule, I'm kind of under the highest overs in the Big 12 and over the highest unders. As a general rule, that's the way that I view that league. So I don't have a play for Iowa State, Kansas State, but I would be skeptical of season-long win totals for both those teams, probably. What I do like for this particular weekend, I'll give you two, and this is deep in the weeds, and so be careful, but this is what I like. I love Hawaii -2.5 hosting Stanford. Big line movement, a lot of steam towards Hawaii. I think that Stanford may be the worst Power 4 team in America. This happens every year with an Hawaii game where there's, whatever reason, a lot of steam around their week 0 game. Sometimes it goes against Hawaii. This year it goes in favor of Hawaii. I like on the Big Island. Actually, it's not the Big Island. Yeah, it's Oahu. They play on Oahu, excuse me. I like Hawaii on the island of Oahu hosting Stanford to cover the 2.5-point number there. And I like Dan Mullen in his debut game for UNLV against Idaho State, not the Idaho Vandals, Idaho State. I like Dan Mullen to go over the team total. I see it at 47.5. It'd obviously be better to get a little lower than that. But even at that, I kind of like UNLV over team total 47.5. So my official picks for week 0, Hawaii -2.5 hosting Stanford, UNLV over 47.5 as a team total against Idaho State. But please be careful. Do your own research. But that is what I like. Okay. Let us get some comments. I'm going to start on YouTube. Jonathan Aaron says, yesterday you talked about the Hogs storming the field after a big win. Isn't any win they get a big win? Is it indeed probably the case? I would say one of the lower win totals in the SEC. Pretty much these days, anything for them would count as a big win. So, yeah, you may be right. Jerry Dogfan says, the only reason I'm running 3 miles is whatever's chasing me. He hasn't gotten tired yet. I get what you're saying about that. I like the elliptical. I used to, believe it or not, I used to run a decent amount. I never ran very fast, but I did run. One day my doctor said, don't do that. Hey, I'm a bigger person. Some of y'all who are a little smaller, I'm sure it's not as big a deal for you. My doctor, I love my doctor. I had a great doctor. You know, you have these like great doctors. I had a great doctor. And one of the things he said, whatever your joints are right now is as good as they'll ever be. So take good care of your joints. And for me, now listen, you're different than me. Your body's different than mine. Your medical advice, I'm sure, is different than mine was. He said, don't run. And so ever since then, I've been more like an elliptical guy. It's a lot lower impact. I like it because you can measure the calories, at least allegedly, as you're burning them. So I do at least 3 miles on the elliptical. Much better for my joints than running is. Dean Alley says, did you see that some of the pubs over there in Iowa accidentally ordered the state flag of Iowa instead of Iowa State's flag? Yeah, it feels like we see a lot of this. Like a couple of years ago, some of the merchants, when Tech was playing there, had Georgia gear on stands just because over in Ireland, much the same way I don't really know the difference between, like, say, a lot of these EPL soccer teams. They don't know the difference between Georgia and Georgia Tech. So there was, I want to say there may have been Georgia and Florida gear for sale with some of the street merchants, things like that, because they just know the difference. But that's pretty funny. Colby Strouder says he had a guy say that 9 conference games means no more Clemson, Georgia, but with a 12-team format, we'll still play them at some point. And I got to tell you, and I would say that reasonable people can disagree on this, but the one conclusion I've drawn is that Georgia doesn't get credit for playing non-conference games, so it might as well not play them. For instance, the fact that Georgia plays a Power 4 non-conference team every year in Georgia Tech, and the discussion of, well, if the SEC ain't going to go to a 9-game conference schedule, then we're not going to blah, 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 blah. The fact that a team like Georgia and others in the SEC play a non-conference opponent every year never gets mentioned. And so in the debate and the discussion of should Georgia and Georgia Tech keep playing, I would say that's the number one argument against playing Georgia Tech, is that when Georgia beats them, they can get credit. If anything, the last couple of years, Tech has been treated as the winner because it played the game close, which is fine, whatever. That's all silliness. But, you know, we've heard in other years, this year's kind of an example of that when Georgia doesn't have the Clemson, the Oregon, that somehow Georgia has a weak non-conference schedule as if Tech doesn't exist. It's just sort of counted as a given, and Georgia doesn't get credit for it. Same thing is true when Georgia did beat Clemson. A year ago, let me ask you this, and you decide for yourself. A year ago, in the discussion of how good Georgia was or wasn't, did you ever hear it mentioned that Georgia beat Clemson 34-3? Seriously, did you ever hear that mentioned? That Georgia blew out an was it the ACC champion or the ACC? Yeah, Clemson won the ACC. Georgia blew out the ACC champion 34-3. Never heard it mentioned. Never got mentioned as a data point about Georgia in the discussion. Same thing in 2022. Georgia beat Oregon 49-3. Should have shut them out. By the way, we predicted that too. You know, I'm more than happy to talk about my imperfections, and many of you are kind enough to point them out to me. But we predicted a shutout for Georgia against Oregon on the air live, on the record, almost got it. And we said that Georgia beat Clemson by more than 30 points last year, and we got that exactly right. So we're not that stupid. But the point is, when Georgia wins these non-conference games, they never get credit for winning them. So if you're not going to get credit for winning them, I don't think you should play them. So Georgia's got a lot of non-conference games coming up against the likes of Ohio State and I guess Florida State and Clemson. My advice to Georgia would be to cancel them all. It really would be. Cancel them all. Don't play them. Don't play them. Anything that you do only serves to help somebody else. Because when you win the game, we heard this about both Oregon and Clemson. Blown out to begin the year against Georgia. But the narrative became, well, Clemson's a completely different team than it was to begin the season. Well, how so? Because they're playing ACC teams now instead of Georgia? I heard the same thing about Oregon. Oregon gets beat by Georgia 49-3. As the season went on, Oregon was winning games. Instead of that proving how good Georgia really was, it became the Oregon's a completely different team than they were to begin the season. Once again, convenient not to be playing the likes of Georgia. For a while, from Cincinnati game, at least in 2020, through the Notre Dame game last year. That's when the streak ended. Georgia had a streak of beating ranked non-conference opponents. Think about Cincinnati. We're going to have to get off the air in a minute, but Cincinnati, Michigan, Oregon, Ohio State, TCU. Georgia was beating ranked non-conference opponents. Long winning streak, average margin of victory, like 17 points per game. And that included close call against Cincinnati, close call against Ohio State, which drug down the average. Georgia was dominating ranked non-conference opponents. You never heard one word about it. Georgia literally didn't get any credit for it. And some people say, well, I don't care what the media says, but this also goes to the ongoing college football playoff debate. It was the number one argument that we used when Georgia, we thought, deserved inclusion in the CFP back in 2023. The fact that, okay, well, Georgia may have dared lose to Alabama, but put them against a non-SEC team and see what happens. That argument didn't get any fair hearing because Georgia doesn't get credit for winning non-conference games. Just don't. So therefore, I don't believe they should play them. Brene Blackburn says she loves my other conference's voice. Yeah. I try not to do too many voices because I can barely do my own. But, yeah, I guess so. Winfred Steinspring says, just face it, BA, UGA doesn't get the love as some of these other teams. I think some of that's because of, you know, we told you the other day, there's a writer, you may not have heard of him. His name's Bruce Feldman. He's a national writer. He does this list of what he calls his like athletic freaks, 100 most athletic freaks for college football. Georgia only had one player on the list, we're led to believe, including Feldman sort of insinuating this, that the Georgia staff basically told them that Micah Morris was their athletic freak. In other words, we know good and well, we talked about several on today's show. There are all kinds of athletic freaks at Georgia, but Georgia doesn't cooperate with the media very much. Everybody responds to incentives. And so therefore there is, I believe, a viewpoint. There's just not much incentive in talking up Georgia because Georgia's not going to help you very much. And so some of why you don't hear much about Georgia in the national media is because, Kirby, the lead voice here, others kind of taking Kirby's lead, Georgia just doesn't cooperate with the media very much. Compare that to Nick Saban. Nick Saban, we think of him as being ornery and didn't like the media, but for most of the last few years of Saban's career, he was essentially already working in the media before he actually officially started working the media. I used to call him Stephen A. Saban because he was on ESPN all the time. Saban actually became pretty cooperative with the media. Maybe one day Kirby Smart will too. For now, he's not, and that's one of the reasons why the overall chatter about Georgia within the national media is so quiet. Some people think the national media doesn't like the SEC. The national media doesn't like SEC fans. Big difference. And I think hopefully you understand what that difference is. They like random SEC athletic director just fine. They don't like SEC fans. I think that's fairly obvious. But sometimes we don't see Georgia getting the chatter. And I said before, I think some of that's sort of related to lack of cooperation. All right, let's see what else on Facebook. Marshall Fleming says he ran 10 miles in his early 20s. Now I just do 30-minute warm-up cardio. Yeah, look, I would say if your warm-up is 30 minutes long, then you're doing a lot more exercise than I'm doing. But I got to where, because I had this park next to my house. This is going back 2 houses ago for me. Right, when you live right next to a park, that's such a great thing. And I used to go there, and I got to where I could run the whole thing. And then I started trying to run it faster. This is right when DawgNation Daily was beginning, or right before DawgNation Daily began. I got to where I could run the whole thing, and then I was trying to run it faster and faster and faster. And sure enough, my knees were hurting from that. They really were. I also used to like to go and climb Stone Mountain. That's fun to do. It's a beautiful view. But that also killed my knees. My gosh, did that kill my knees.
Shout out to Collins Hill tonight. Go Eagles.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Jay Black, a Collins Hill graduate. Tonight we have Collins Hill on Atlanta News First against Woodward Academy. It's our Great Atlanta Bash. I'm excited about that.
Most famous Collins Hill graduate to play for Georgia? We only got one that I know of.
Remind me who it is.
Brandon Coutu.
Oh, there you go.
We were in the same class.
Oh, that's really fun. Yeah, Brandon Coutu, good kicker at Georgia. Obviously, one of the great teams in recent Georgia history is the 2021 Collins Hill team that featured Travis Hunter. And Sam Horner, we told you about yesterday, was quarterback on that team, and he may be starting quarterback for Missouri before it's all said and done. Matt Rugavina says if Tennessee is, in fact, no longer a rival, it's imperative we win our last game there. Yeah, listen, I think that's imperative for a lot of reasons. And I would say that Georgia-Tennessee has some degree of rivalry. And look, I'm not saying what happened in the 80s should matter all that much now, but it is important to know that back in the 80s, kind of pre-modern SEC, Georgia and Tennessee did not play every year back then. Georgia and Tennessee did not start playing every year until the SEC went to divisions in the 90s. For instance, from a yearly game standpoint, Georgia has a lot more history with South Carolina than it does Tennessee. Marshall Fleming says he still works out 2.5 hours a day, 6 days a week. Been doing it for 45 years. No need to stop. I'm only 58 years young. Well, listen, sounds like that's a great way to stay young. I think that's awesome. All right, a couple of final comments, then we have to go because being at home is a little different. Garrison Tucker, interesting information in here. Matt Rugavina asking about the 3 permanent rivals. Yes, we talked about this. We said Florida, Auburn, or Givens. At one point in time, I was hearing Kentucky. You've heard a little bit over time about South Carolina. I've also heard that South Carolina didn't want to do that. All of this, of course, is speculation. Yeah, so good stuff. All right, we got to go. I'll see you tonight. Atlanta News First, for Woodward Academy and Collins. It's going to be a really, really good game. Eagles against War Eagles. I actually just realized that. So a little bit of a double mascot game there. Also some expanded pregame and postgame coverage around that, which should be fun. And when we show up on Monday, we'll be in game week. And I think there's one big thing for Georgia to prove in its first game against Marshall. We'll talk about what that is then. For now, though, check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Stay cool and comfortable. Plenty of hot weather still to come as the football season begins. So RS Andrews can keep you cool and comfortable on that. They'll get you air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can trust them on that. So have a great day. Back here Monday, Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. Enjoy the weekend, everybody.